if you can, close your eyes. If not, just begin to take some deep breaths through your lower dantian or your root chakra. And as we take these breaths through our lower part of our body, we can start to visualize whole body breathing. So let's take a couple long, deep breaths. Inhale. And exhale at your own pace. And inhale. And exhale. And inhale. And exhale. And on your next inhale, I'd like you to visualize some happy moment, whether it is today or another day or in the future, and just concentrate on that emotion. Inhale. And exhale what does not serve you. Exhale. And inhale. And exhale. Now, throughout our days, we often get very distracted, very clouded. Our minds, these amazing gifts we have, they start to run a bit on autopilot. So sometimes we just need to take a few breaths to really refocus our intention, as our mind can't always fix our mind. That is, it will try to fix itself by running in a circuit, in a loop. So to get out of these loops, all we need is some breath and to refocus our attention. So do a few more breaths here. And I urge you to call in something you're grateful for. It could be as specific as something that you have received in the last day or two, or it could be as vague as being grateful for air, or being grateful for breath, or being grateful for the ability to feel, for the ability to think, for family, for parents, for experiences, for challenges that shape you who you are. All of these challenges we face are on our path, our soul path, building resilience, building strength, building character, and creating that new being, that ever-changing being, that only constant that we have to count on, the change. So thank you for joining me in this guided meditation. May the rest of your day be filled with pockets of peace. Remember, meditation does not require 30 minutes or some set time limit. It can be as much as 10 hours, and it can be as little as 5 seconds or 1 second. Just remember that at any time, drop back into this space. Drop back into this deep breath. It's a way to refocus our intentions, to become a bit more mindful. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that, Derek. That was really, really nice. Super grounding, even for this right now. But and you're with nature, so it's even better. It's awesome.
Yeah,
Or not better, but
everything is nature. There are people around too, and they count as nature as well. I think
Yeah.
sometimes even I find myself guilty of demonizing certain things, like, oh, here, I'm in Wi-Fi zone, I'm in technology, I'm in a building, like this is bad, right? But at the same time, we use these for such wonderful purposes. So it's actually another opportunity um, to experience some gratitude, right?
Yeah. Yeah, as you're
Yeah,
saying that, it's like, oh yeah, I'm in my room, but it's still nature. There's still a blessing being here. So that's a good
yeah.
reminder too. Yeah, so thank you again. I know we had this conversation when we were messaging about truth, and we just wanted to, I guess, start with that, right? And I remember messaging you and sharing with you, like, oh, like I had this perspective that everybody in this community world of spirituality shared truth, like their personal truth, or would just say the truth. And just again, like speaking out loud with you, like, oh, like I don't think that's necessarily true, you know? And I was like, oh, like I think people who've gone through pain or just inherently want to share their truth share truth. And yeah, we had a conversation about it, so we can start off with that. But I think something that I also was thinking about earlier was, and you actually mentioned it too, like, oh, it's also pleasure. Pleasure brings the truth out of people as well. But yeah, so I've been pondering on that like the last couple of weeks, and it's interesting, you know.
Hmm, I see. Yeah, truth is interesting. I mean, um, even with when we call certain words into, this is coming to me now, is that when we call certain words in, right? I like to bring some attention to the word spell, right? The word spell, when we spell something out, right? You know,
Mm.
perhaps you and I, when we're kids, we think of spelling as, just a part of, our educational institution that teaches us how to spell the words. But
Mm.
we really, if we kind of think a bit outside the box and a bit creatively, like spell, kind of like casting a spell, like as if you were, some wild magician, right? But really, in a way, that's what we're doing, is every time we open our mouth, every time we say a word, it is a spell. And depending what your upbringing is, that spell is going to perhaps trigger different things. So, for
Mm.
example, with the word truth, when we use the word truth, it's going to mean, especially to whoever's watching right now, truth will mean so many different things, right?
Yes.
For example, let's say someone is, in the midst of the last couple of days in some uh, really dramatic situation. Let's just pick a hypothetical dramatic situation where uh, there's some truth being discovered between a relationship, right? So when they hear the word truth, it's going to trigger that, right? Because that's
Mm.
present for them. So um, interestingly, when we first talked about truth, what came to mind for me was uh, was authority and truth, and
Mm.
truth being the ultimate authority. And then I guess the question for me would be, well, what is truth then?
Yeah.
And I guess my best answer would be that it is different for everyone,
Yeah.
um, but there seems to be some sort of underlying truth that's connecting all things.
Yes.
But I guess everyone's trying to define that, and no one's.
Yeah. Ooh, you cut off a little bit. What did you say? Ooh, you're cutting off. The last thing you said was everybody's defining truth. I I want to agree with you on that too, because like I've been reflecting on my own like life, you know, and I speak truth or when I haven't. And it's like, oh yeah, it's given me that broader perspective. Okay. It's given me that broader perspective of, oh yeah, it's, I think that maybe it's a judgment that I had before was that only this group of people is going to share truth. And then recently when I was pondering, it's like, oh wait, like we're all human beings. Like we all have different pains, different fears. Also, like I was mentioning, not mentioning, I was thinking like fears, different experiences. Like you said, we have different upbringings. So it's all different and it's different for everybody. And something that I want to point out that you said was that there is that universal, bigger truth that does connect to all of us. Can you hear me? Ooh, you're frozen again. Something that he mentioned too, I don't know if you can still hear me, was the stories we tell ourselves. Oh, okay. He's okay. So that's my pondering on truth and sharing the truth and speaking truth. And I always mention with life coaching and with like the videos of personal truth as well. Let's add him back. Okay. Hey, were
So
you able to
thanks for
hear what I
having
said?
me on again.
Hey,
All these
you know what?
wonderful.
It's also
Yeah.
11:11, so
Yes, happy 11/11. So yeah, yeah, wow.
meant to be.
Yeah, so truth. Um, I was just I was still able to hear you while you were uh going and I was disconnecting. So you were last touching on different people's truths and the pains behind those truths. Could you elaborate a bit more?
Yeah, like I was pondering and it's like, oh yeah, speaking the truth or sharing our truth or the experiences, like it all, my own judgment was, oh, this group of people will always say the truth. And then pondering on it, it's like, wait, no, we're all human beings. We all have our own sets of pain, fears, basically being human for not sharing our
Mm.
own personal truth or truth. And
Hmm.
it also made me think of, and I know you mentioned pleasure as well, like speaking truth out of pleasure, which I was like, oh yeah, like it's the whole spectrum. It's not just black and white. And that's kind of where I left off. So, hey, Lucy. She's like, yeah.
Hi, Lucy.
Yeah. And
I can't see the
so,
comments right now.
okay. So she said hi, and that's so truth. And something that
Hmm.
I wanted to also bring up was because you mentioned this, like the stories we tell ourselves.
Hmm.
And I
Yes.
feel how there's a connection there with speaking our own personal truth or even a truth that we think is true. But
Yes.
like it goes back to like, is it?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. It's so interesting how these stories that we tell ourselves and there's one person in my mind that I am thinking of right now. I won't say her name, but years ago, she would always just laugh as I would, be telling these stories and it's like, oh yeah, the stories we tell ourselves. Yeah, yeah, the stories. You're just laughing. Just a very joyful, aware being that's done a lot of that self work, that cognitive work, that soul work, right? Some people call it shadow work, right?
Mm,
Um, and I never understood it. It took me years to understand what she was talking about. and really with these stories is that let's say we experience something, right? Let's say we experience one thing that happens to us, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, Big or small, right? Once we begin to focus on that, even if we feel like we need to express this, like, oh, I'm feeling this way because of this, right? We start
Yeah.
going on about this story to a friend, right? But we're calling that emotion back in. We're calling that experience back in. So we're really creating that truth. Like that might have been a truth in the moment. Like, hey, this stimuli is happening to me. Um, Now, of course, we're not. I'm not getting into deeply traumatic experiences here.
Mm-hmm.
These need to come out. They need to be healed. I believe with professional help. Um, Loving professional help, but our day to day, our week to week, our month to month, year to year challenges, which are difficult, um, that is a truth. Like that thing that happens to us is a truth. But when we explain it, when we attach stories to it, when we explain how this made us feel and why we are feeling the way we are, or my day was this because, or I, like we are creating that, and we're literally drilling into our brains like a deeper truth, and it's that emotion. So what psychology tells us
Mm-hmm.
is that when we recall an experience, right,
Mm-hmm.
whether fictitious or real, right, this memory, every time we recall this, we re-experience the emotions, right? So in a way, we are so much in control of our own truth, right?
Mm-hmm.
Perhaps not always what happens to us, but how we react to it. And from there, what kind of story we create.
Yeah. Yes. I There's actually a podcast that I heard recently with I think I'm saying his name wrong, Gaber Mate and Tim Ferriss,
Mm,
and he shared
phenomenal.
something that happened, like him paying somebody and the guy not showing up to fix something at his house, and there was an emotion, and Gaber basically asks some questions about this emotion and how that emotion has always been there, but it's
Mm-hmm.
from a story or something that has happened to him before in his life. So whenever something similar, whenever the emotion arises, it's not just from that moment, but he's reacting to something that has happened in the past. And I thought like that's very true. Like a lot of the moments, just like how you said, things happen in the moment and we react to that emotion and we go on with these stories thinking that it's just
Mm,
that day. But that emotion it goes deeper. It's not just that day. But
yeah,
I think it
it's.
mhm.
Mm,
So for me it was like, oh yeah. And I think before I had heard about it, but when they were talking back and forth and they were sharing, it's like, oh shit, yeah. That's very true. Very, very true. And I know we've mentioned so many times about taking that step back. And I think in those moments it's so hard because your emotion does take over and the stories end up taking over. But how do you think would be like, or how would you do it, I guess, where in that moment you take a step back, not to react from that emotion or that story any further?
yeah. Um, First of all, it is sometimes more difficult, uh,
Yeah.
more easier said in theory than done. But the good news is that the more you do it, the easier it gets over
Mm.
over time, right? Because that's just another habitual neural pathway that we're now building. Like our brains are so incredible, right? It's only when we become fixed and we believe we are rigid that we actually are rigid.
Yeah.
Neuroscience shows us that even as we age into old age, the reason for neurodegenerative decline is a lot of it is belief, right? So it
Mm-hmm.
really is like law of attraction manifestation.
Mm.
Um, we just have different names for it in psychology. Um, so to answer your question, when I'm on the verge of forgetting, and that's okay. Okay, so
Yes.
yes, when we are experiencing the emotion, it can be difficult, especially if we have these habitual patterns, to identify this emotion and just seek something out. Like, oh, it's this stimuli, it's this thing that is to blame, right? Um, but one strategy that really works is when we're feeling that anxiety or we're feeling that frustration. Um, Once we learn this truth, it helps us. And that truth is that uh, if we just say to ourselves, wow, I'm experiencing this anxiety, I'm feeling this anxiety, but not attaching like I'm feeling anxiety
Mm,
because then that places the focus on this external, this thing that you cannot control. Oh, I'm feeling anxious because this person said this, because this person honked at me, because this person rear-ended me or tailgated me. I'm feeling upset because of that. Okay, well, what's your next option? Well, you're going to change them? No. So you're already
yeah.
committing yourself to feeling that emotion until it goes away. You're giving that control away. So when we start to put the focus on what we can control, or just release what we can't, like, wow, my body's producing a lot of anxiety. Like, what is that? Let's explore that. I know it sounds a bit woo, like, oh, let's explore that. But really, like, often if we just witness what we're feeling and we actually accept it, a lot of it's non-acceptance, right? We deny, we
Mm-hmm.
don't want to
We
accept,
push it.
we want things to be a certain way, we have an
Yeah.
expectation that doesn't line up, then we can, get angry at this external. But the good
Yeah.
news is that if we take a second, we just sit, we identify, whether we write it down or we even say it out loud is a great practice. Like, I'm feeling angry. Like, have
Yeah.
you ever been in traffic and felt just, oh, that person is, just stop yourself. Like, wow, like, geez, I'm feeling angry. Like, that's me. It
Mm-hmm.
doesn't matter what anyone else has done. If I focus on that, I'm poisoning myself, right?
Yeah.
So what is the best strategy for moving forward with that? And what science and meditation shows the best strategy is taking a breath and being present with that emotion. It won't go away instantly, but it will go away a lot quicker than creating a story attached to it, right?
Yeah.
And as we get to our friends or destination, like, oh, how was your day? You can choose. You can choose in that moment. Like, do you want to say, oh, it was good, but this and this happened to me? Okay, now you're re-experiencing that emotion. You're creating that tension in your body.
Mm-hmm.
Or you can just not even focus on that. Or you can focus on something really awesome, just like a little pocket of your day, right? That was great. And
Mm-hmm.
say, oh, it was great. I went for a walk. It was nice. It was a great part of my day. Or you
Yeah.
can say, I had a really challenging experience. Speak about that experience, not give details, right?
Yes.
And it really, and I feel very good and stronger coming out of it, right? So we have
Yeah.
ways we can approach this that don't require to create a negative or throwing away our control to the external, right?
I actually
Um,
really like that too. Like being honest with how you feel, and you don't have to share if you don't want to, or like you said, adding to it because you're reenacting it. A while ago, I was feeling super shitty a couple months ago, and I went to
mhm,
this store, and the guy was super hyped up, like, "Hey, like, how are you doing? Like, good morning. Like, again, how are you?" And I was going to the back, towards the back to get a drink, and I was like, I feel shitty, but that was it. And I think he was surprised that I wasn't, one, I think, saying, no, I'm good, like, how are you? And two, that I just wasn't probably sharing, you know? And it's
mhm,
interesting because I think a lot of people are expect to hear good or great and
mhm,
go along with this whole maybe just the top of maybe again like not being truthful, I guess, of the truth of what you're
mhm,
feeling in that moment. But I think it could be so opening or so freeing if you share that feeling itself. Again, not going into the story, but just sharing, like, I feel shitty today or I feel annoyed.
Mm.
And I think it gives permission to others to not fake being all right or being good or being great. But yeah, maybe that was a little bit off topic, but but it's
No,
another
I think it's
so
totally.
interesting.
Mhm.
So interesting. I was
I think
talking
it's
to
quite related.
yeah, it came up for a reason, right?
Hmm.
It's so funny. There's like another story too where like something happened recently, and I was hanging out with somebody, and I was sharing like what was happening, and in my head, I'm like, oh, it's so crazy, like this happened, and the person that I hung out with, he was like, no, it's logic, and my first thought was like, what? But okay, the moment that he said that, the realization that I had was, oh, I had all these stories. So
Mm.
the reason why I thought what had just happened was crazy or frustrating or whatever it is, like it is, and I'm going to validate those feelings. But at the same time, I got to that point because I made all these stories or I had all these expectations or these,
Mm.
again, stories. So when he said that,
Hmm.
like, oh, it's just logic, I was like, oh, like it took me like totally back to that, like, oh shit, that's a realization. And it
Hmm.
didn't seem as heavy as it felt. It's like, oh yeah, like it is, huh? And it's also a learning experience, but it's super
That
fucking
it is.
but it's so
Yeah, some would
interesting
say we
how
are.
just like one sentence can break you from all that shit. Like, oh yeah, the stories we tell ourselves.
The stories we tell ourselves. Yeah.
Yeah.
And yeah, I'm really glad that you added that in, you called that in, especially for viewers, because it can be easy to take some of these practices or theories as like, oh, well, we can't just always focus on the positive, um, which is kind of true, but it's also kind of false. I'll explain. Um, So number one is yes, if the number one thing is being authentic, right? So
Yes.
authentically expressing yourself, right? Someone asks you how you are, and you actually feeling terrible, like everything in you, you don't have a space to be positive. And if you say I'm fine, it's like, well, you're already communicating like I'm not fine, and there's something there, right? So it's best to just be like, I'm not feeling great, right?
Yeah.
Especially if someone is genuinely caring how you are. What I've learned lately is when someone asks me how I am, if I haven't had a good day, sometimes I'm like, you know what? I'm great now. Like in that moment, that's love, right? And
Oh
sometimes that's
yeah,
all
it's
we
like a
need.
miracle.
Sometimes we just need some love. And I think you mentioned this in one of your posts, like we're all walking each other home. And I
Yes.
saw that in a friend's chalkboard recently too. And I just love it because we are social beings. Like there's a reason there's 8 billion of us. There's a reason, when we were hunter gatherers, you know,
um
uh, joining more minds resulted in, a better harvest, longer lives, all sorts of things, right? Like one person can't take a woolly mammoth down on by themselves, right?
yeah.
So coming into where we are now at the peak of our evolution, we really have this amazing potential to just that, walk each other home, really remind each other, that we are loved, and
Yeah.
that it's okay. Like, hey, like we're not, not always going to be peachy sunshine, right?
Yes.
And in the world of um, human experience, if we always experience positivity, then that's not a thing anymore, right? Positivity no longer exists. That's just a normal, like that's just a baseline, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we have these polarities
Mm-hmm.
that we do experience. But one thing that seems very common is the people who go through a lot of more deeper negative, deeper traumatic experiences, but when they come out of it, um, if they come out of it, if they're helped with good teachers, with wisdom, with good self-work, the willingness, ultimately the
Mhm.
willingness, right, to go to that
That's a big
place.
one.
Uh, when they come out, they typically, these people have made this choice, right? So they've seen a lot
Yeah.
of that darkness. And actually, I like to quote this one man recently I saw on Facebook. This somehow was sponsored. I guess he sponsored himself to be sent out there. But he's this man in a wheelchair, right?
Uh,
And he got in this motorcycle accident about 8 years ago. Ron the Flying Motorcyclist. Shout out to him. And he talks about the choice he made to be positive 8 years ago, right?
mm,
Like imagine that right now, right? Like like you lose your legs, right? You don't have your legs. Like where do you go from there, right? Um,
yeah.
and he in that day he was taking a video in the park, like I am. Not saying I'm him,
Yeah.
but there's a similarity there. And he was saying how he's gonna go smell the roses later, and
Mm,
really just focusing on making that choice whenever possible.
yeah.
I think that might be key.
I want to
So
piggyback on
again,
that.
authenticity is very
Yeah.
important, right? Because if we push stuff under the rug,
Yeah.
that's no good either, right?
Yeah. To piggyback about what you said, because it is being authentic. It's so funny because we say like, hey, we have different perspectives. We're gonna make a video and it's great. And then when we're talking, we come back to like the same universal truth. But it's cool because we still share it differently. Um,
Yeah.
there is okay. So to piggyback what you're saying, because I think there is being authentic with what we're feeling in the moment of that pain or that frustration, whatever it is, or if you had a traumatic experience, going into it, and like you said, the willingness to go into it. And I think at some point, and again, I want to say this from experience and from my own perspective of where I am now. So hopefully this doesn't offend anybody, but again, my own perspective, my own viewpoint as of right now. I think at some point there is a space where you do have to graduate. And I'm using that word from Ram Dass, where you move forward in learning and growing and basically making the shit into fertilizer and making it into flowers. Like you can stay in
Yeah.
that feel the shit and feeling all these things as long as you want. But I think at some
Hmm.
point there's some kind of willingness or power or
Yeah.
whatever it is where you can grow it into something else,
I
you know?
agree. I
And
completely.
and
I've been there,
yeah.
and I likely will be there in the future,
Oh,
right?
definitely.
Uh,
Yeah.
we all will do. In a way, it's an everyday battle, right? And this can, turn some people away, or like, what do you mean an everyday battle? It means I have to. What do you mean? No, no, like that's exactly the problem. Is
Yeah.
that attitude, right? Oh no, it's like, hey, it's an everyday battle. And
Yeah.
starting these mantras like I am capable of winning all of these battles. I will
Yeah.
rise up on top of all these. And one powerful practice I found when I'm like in this loop,
Mhm.
and as soon as I recognize I'm in that loop, whether I'm like, just waking up and, my brain's not fully like connected because like I've been sleeping in a
Mhm.
position, got negative thought loops, or, I'm tired or whatever, or something has happened. As soon as I'm feeling that like fear, frustration,
Yeah.
whatever it might be, blame, jealousy, envy, lack of self-worth, all of us, like as soon as I recognize that I'm actually feeling that, not fixated on that thing, I say to myself, no, I can't afford to think like that. I say that. I
Mm.
said that's my mantra.
Uh-huh.
And I recommend anyone that it resonates with them to try it out, because is like I can't afford to think that way. Because literally you can't. Your
Uh-huh.
happiness depends on it. Your longevity depends on it. Your brain depends on it. Your family and friends depend on it. Your community depend on it. All right. Like
Community.
you depend, right? So, and the great thing here is that we have that gold. It's right inside our heart. It's right inside our brain. So as soon as we recognize, the thing is, the trick is the brain likes it's a little addictive thing. It's kind of like, you know, um, it's like kind of like taking a little drug every time. Where even though you might know, it's just like, oh, but wait, I want to fix on this. I want to fixate on this a little bit more because
Yeah.
it's addictive. It's addictive to
Addicting.
fixate on those little negative, uh, destructive self-worth. As weird as
Yeah.
it sounds, it's very addictive. And that's
Yeah.
why people remain in this loop. So to have a mantra like, no, I can't afford to think this way. And just move your body is a great exercise. If you need other positive presences, whether you're around people or not, stick some headphones in or just play on your phone. uh, Anyone that's watching right now likely has
Yeah.
access to YouTube. You can like Google I am affirmations. You can Google
Yeah.
different frequencies. You can Google motivational speakers. Whatever gets you out of that loop, right?
Yeah.
Again, this mantra for those listening is, I can't afford to think like that right now, right?
Yes.
Because if you think like that, you're going to remain in that cycle.
Yeah. And I want to share, like, whoever's watching too, the cycle that you're in. And again, for my own experience, sometimes those cycles feel so true because that's all we've ever known.
Totally.
And something that I want to share from experience is that this uncertainty, this frustration, this anxious feeling about whatever it is, like, it's not forever and there is another way. Even if you don't know that other way, like, it's there and it's more peaceful and it's more calming and it's more loving. But again,
Yeah.
it takes practice to step out of these addictive patterns that sometimes it's all we've ever known, and to
Yeah.
see at least the little baby steps of this other way.
Yeah. And
So,
it really does. I really like, um, it takes these baby steps. Um, and I think there was this one picture I wish I could bring up right now, but I'll explain it really easily.
oh,
There's some goal or some, thing you're working towards, right? So that can be as mundane as, acquiring an expensive piece of jewelry to, mastering yourself psychologically. Okay.
uh,
Uh, and when there are small steps, there are a lot more of them, but you're going to be able to go up them quickly and you're going to be able to reach your goal. And all the while the way, you're going to be able to look back and be like, hey, I made another couple of steps. That was great. But if you
yeah,
put the steps, if there's only like 3 huge steps to get there, you're going to look up at that step. You're not even going to know how to get up it. So what are you going to do? You're going to walk away. You're going to go and do something else. You're not going to go on that journey, right?
yeah,
So I so what you say about baby steps is like absolutely,
yeah.
absolutely crucial.
That's one of my own mantras, and that's something that I also use in my sessions with life coaching, where it's like sometimes we want to get to a specific place or we have a goal and we look at all the steps and it feels overwhelming. And going back to the stories we tell ourselves, we create stories on how this is so hard and how we can't do it and this and
Yeah,
that. And it's going back
yeah,
to, hold on, what's the first step? What's the baby step that's right in front of
yeah,
you? Do that.
yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, to interject further, our our brains and our bodies have adapted and evolved to do a couple things, right? So we've evolved to uh, be addicted to food, right? Because when we
Mm.
eat food, we feel good, and that gives us energy,
Comfort.
right? Um, so similarly, we've evolved to uh, do things that require less calories. Okay, so not just this is why a lot of people have trouble, unless they find something they enjoy, which is the key also to physical
Oh,
exercise. They find difficulty doing that because our brains literally signal us, don't do this, it's a waste of our energy, we need to conserve, right? So the same thing happens with these these mental challenges, right? So what is easy? What takes less work? Guess what takes less work? Staying in your negative thought cycle, staying
mm,
sedentary, not changing, not creating new mental thought loops. Because it's
mm,
challenging. It requires more calories from your brain. Our brain uses 20% of our body's calories, right?
mm,
So as we create these new new things, even if they're going to benefit us long term. Our brain has this part that's like, oh wait, don't create that. I want to stay in this negative thought loop. I want to like stick to these habits even though they're not serving me. Why?
Yeah.
Because our brain simply is just this, it's just this like, old archaic system that's like, I need to conserve calories, right? So that's why it's so difficult for us to actually create these new positive um, changes in our life, because change takes effort, it takes
Yes.
work, right? So even though in the long term the investment will pay tons of dividends, in the short term the other part of our brain signals us, no, 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 stay in your negative thoughts,
Yeah.
stay in what works. You don't want change, right?
Yeah. And that's like totally the core, I feel, in our genes or in our caveman days, right? And yeah, I agree to that. And I think going back to like the what I was saying earlier, where a lot of where we're sometimes just used to the pattern of being in that space. Like sometimes that's
Yeah,
all we've ever known, of being in that space of, I don't want to say negativity, but in that space itself of
yeah,
the ongoing things aren't working out, like we're hardcore victims, or it's just pain all the time,
yeah. And
and so
that's just
forth.
the ego, right?
Yeah.
It's just the ego.
And
This
like you were saying,
identification to our form and where we are currently, right?
and it goes back to what you're saying,
Change
right?
is
Like change.
it's hard to change, right? It takes effort,
Yeah. Yeah, it
and
does.
it is humbling in a
And
lot of
it's
ways,
scary
especially with this
too.
mental work, because we
Yeah.
want to attach this idea like, oh, yeah, I'm already perfect and I don't have to do the work, and because it's scary to admit,
Comfortable.
hey, maybe these other people, um, or not people, whatever. Maybe there's something more I could be doing, right? Because we get feelings of embarrassment, like, oh, I should already
Yeah.
be here. It's like, well, guess what? You're not, okay? So, accept it. Let your ego just, accept it. Our
Mm-hmm.
fragile, our fragile
Ego.
ass egos, I like to call it. Like,
Yeah.
it's so hard for us. We get in our own way time and time again, because we have this idea that, like, if I start to change, people will find me out. They'll find out like how not good I am, and how, so it's like there's this deeper knowing we have that, like, we want to change, but
Yeah.
it's like the fear is stopping us, right? It's just fear. And
Yeah. It's our own
it's
judgments of stuff.
yeah,
It's our own judgments.
yeah,
And from experience, like the more you do the work, the more you go in, the more you do the shadow work, the more you do become yourself, and the more you do are the more you're in that space of love. So it's interesting because it's that experience of we don't want to do it because it's scary, because it's change, because all of this, because we want to be in that space of love. But it's again like quoting Ram Dass, like once you let go of it, you can have it all. Right? Like it reminds me of that quote. Like once you do the work, once you let go, once you see your judgments, work on it, like you are more in that space. You know? So so awesome. Okay, so I think we're gonna end this video because I think it's been over 30 minutes, right? But are you down to do a little prayer? Like, let's end it with a prayer. Again, before we do that,
definitely.
thank you so much for doing this video again. Speaking out
My
loud,
pleasure.
sharing where we're at. Thank you so much. You're awesome. But
As are you.
thank you. So I can lead us in a prayer. So let's just close our eyes and let's give thanks to the universe for having us here today and for having you wherever you're at in this moment. And let's thank it for all the little blessings that we have going on in our lives, and let's ask for the universe to see these blessings even when we're stuck in our mind, stuck in our head, and ask the universe for guidance to see what's right in front of us with love. So yeah, amen. Ram ram, hallelujah.
Amen.
Awesome.
Gratitude.
Yes,
Thank
awesome.
you,
Thank you so
Narita.
much. Have a good day.
You too. And thanks everyone for tuning in.
Yes, bye.
Blessed be.